everyone. My name is Blanche Ting. I'm the Energy and Low Carbon Coordinator for UNIDO at the Southern Africa Regional Office based in Pretoria. So to start off the session, I would like to introduce you to the Low Carbon Transport Project in South Africa, which is the project in which initiated the study. So just a very brief background on this project. These are the three main pillars that we normally work with: infrastructure development, policy and regulatory framework, pilot projects with cities. And one of the major achievements we've had over the past years is we've had a few technological demonstration in the form of PV stations in different parts of the country. And I thought this would be important to mention, studies and policies. So over the number of years, we've informed policy making, particularly on the National Green Transport Strategy. And where the study fits in is that it's looking at the impact. Firstly, we had a study on macroeconomic impact study on EV adoption in South Africa, and that informed the study, which is what we're launching today. So the next two slides is really just to give you a scene setting of the session. So in our deliberation of the Low Carbon Transport South Africa project, we've looked at the impact of EVs on South Africa's automotive sector. And as you're probably aware, it's one of the highest, South Africa's highest component exports are related to ICE, internal combustion engines. But this obviously, the market there is the European markets, but most of the European OEMs are starting to look at the output of EVs and components. And so this may have major potential disruption for South Africa's component exports. And I was reading about what implications there may be. The EU is certainly looking at net zero, climate change, and a ban on sale of polluting vehicles. So I was reading this report from Deloitte that they were saying EVs would secure around 32% of the total market share by 2030. At the moment, it's around 2 to 3%. So it's quite a huge ramp up. And most of this growth will come from China and EU and the USA. So it will have some implication if South Africa is exporting to at least to the EU. And then the other deliberation we've had is in terms of mineral endowments. As you probably can appreciate, South Africa is quite endowed with rich minerals, particularly if you look at manganese, which is an important component in cathodes for lithium-ion batteries. Those are just some of the numbers to give you some idea of how important it is to beneficiate manganese. If you only export it as raw ore, it's only at that amount. But if you do beneficiate it, for example, if you find it in the cathode part, which is the NMC, nickel, manganese, and cobalt oxide, it will have quite a potential amount of money. But of course, processing these raw minerals are not easy. And so that really informed our thinking about initiating the study. And also there's South Africa's rich not only in these minerals, but there are also rare earth metals, which has a role to play in the EV value chain. And also, in addition to that, of course, we're not an isolated country. There's neighboring countries as well as the Southern African Development Community, the SADC region, which has vast resources like lithium, cobalt, graphite, and nickel, among others. So these are really the questions we're asking. How can we develop this value chain? Are there specific parts of the value chain we should be developing? And so, yeah, this is just to give you a graphic representation of these different types of materials. So if you look at the EV side, lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, and iron, aluminium. So all of these minerals are quite rich, not only in South Africa, but in the continent. And these are the rare earth metals, and of course, in these parts of the car. So so it would make sense to ask questions about how we could actually play a role in this growing industry. So the battery manufacturing value chain study is the reason for the study is to feed into the broader debate on low carbon transport, green industrial development policy shift in EV value chain. And so UNIDO, together with DTIC, initiated a study on the potential for opportunities to develop the lithium-ion battery manufacturing value chain in the country. And this study was undertaken by TIPS, the Trade and Industrial Policy Strategy, on behalf of the Low Carbon Transport Project. Okay, so these are some of the questions we've raised. This will obviously be discussed much later. So these are the questions we asked. Does South Africa and other African countries have potential to build on their natural resources, and the country develop new capabilities, and should the country focus on specific segments? So I won't take much more of your time. So those are just to provide you some scene setting. And yeah, so this is our panel today, which I'm really grateful for. We have Ms. Eden Foley from UNIDO, who will give us, who's written a report on the SADC perspective of the battery manufacturing chain. And then followed by Mr. Galo Sinclair from TIPS. And then Mr. Paul Osborne, who's from Balancel, who provides an industry perspective. And then Mr. Kharafuri, who's the Chief Director for Green Industries, DTIC. And so it's a great panel, and I thank you so much. And that's it from my side. That's just to give you an overview of the team in UNIDO. But I'll hand it over to Eden. Thank you.
Good day, colleagues. My name is Eden Foley, and I'm the program manager at the UNIDO e-mobility program. And I'm going to give a brief overview of the battery manufacturing landscape, particularly within the SADC region. The SADC region is endowed with the main raw materials used within the production of lithium-ion batteries, namely graphite, cobalt, copper, lithium, manganese, nickel, and vanadium. And as my previous colleague stated, also rare earth metals and fluorspar. There are three main strategies which can support the acceleration of battery manufacturing within the SADC region. The first policy is the SADC Green Economy Strategy and Action Plan for Sustainable Development. The plan highlights key strategies and actions within energy, transport, manufacturing, and mining sectors. This includes supporting the development of the green manufacturing sectors, promoting green public transport networks, and also multimodal transport, promoting energy efficiency, and supporting renewable energy. One of the second most important supportive strategies is the SADC Industrialization Strategy Roadmap. This is a comprehensive blueprint for fast-tracking member states' participation in global value chains. And then the final one, which brings everything together, is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is a single continent-wide market for trade in goods and services, investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy. And it was launched in January this year. The aim of the trade agreement is specifically to benefit small, medium, micro enterprises, which are responsible for more than 80% of Africa's employment and 50% of its GDP. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is an African solution for supporting industrial development, creating new business opportunities, generating jobs, and reducing poverty. So what are the opportunities that exist within battery manufacturing in the SADC region? One of them is the beneficiation of raw materials into battery-grade material. Battery-grade material is a high-purity product that is a precursor in making battery materials needed to produce cell components. As there are a number of mining operations within the SADC region, there's an opportunity for the value chain to be expanded further into beneficiation of the raw material that is currently being mined. Another opportunity that exists is cell component and cell manufacturing. At the moment, these initiatives are in research and development and innovation stage, and most of the activities are taking place in South Africa. However, there is an opportunity for this for these activities to be expanded into other member states. Then there's battery pack assembly. A lot of the main lithium-ion battery pack assemblers in the SADC region are based in South Africa. However, there is an opportunity for development and expansion into other SADC member states. And then finally, there's an opportunity within repurposing and recycling. Within the repurposing of lithium-ion batteries, these can be used from second life electric vehicle batteries. In other words, batteries which can no longer be used within a vehicle, and then they can be repurposed to used within micromobility applications and also within energy storage. There's also an opportunity for recycling of spent lithium-ion batteries, mostly because of the cost it involves to export these batteries to outside of the continent to be recycled there. Some of the main challenges that we are faced when it comes to accelerating the battery manufacturing value chain in SADC are political economy challenges. There is conflict in the region. Member states are also stuck in a perpetual cycle of being commodity-driven economies. In the 2019 Corruption Perception Index, only 4 out of the 16 SADC member states received scores above 60%, and those were Botswana, Seychelles, Mauritius, and Namibia. And for interest's sake, South Africa received 44%. The region is also still a very carbon-intensive region and relies heavily on coal for its source of energy. Some of the main barriers include skill shortage, because training and skills development is needed mainly within the sectors that need employees who have a strong foundation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, otherwise known as STEM subjects. And there is a huge challenge at the moment within the entire region with mastering the competency in STEM subjects, starting from basic education level right up to tertiary education. And at the moment, the private sector's investment into the manufacturing sector in SADC in general has remained low, and development and progression along the lithium-ion battery manufacturing value chain requires a substantial amount of financing for research, development, and innovation. Another challenge is the infrastructure within the SADC region. Energy, transport, and ICT infrastructure remains a challenge, while electricity shortages continue to affect the region. And there's also slow implementation of policies amongst member states within the region. For example, the implementation of the SADC industrialization strategy and roadmap within member states, although has been ratified, has been very, very slow. In addition, there's also slow implementation of policies which can create an enabling environment, for example, for the adoption of electric vehicles, which creates a limited market because industry is not incentivized to expand the market. And then there are 3 pillars of potential strategic partnership. The first one would be the creation of a regional battery alliance, which could form a platform for developing strategic partnerships. This could be a multi-stakeholder alliance to develop a battery roadmap for advancing battery technology, competitiveness, and skills and development. Then another pillar of partnership is between energy storage centers of excellence, government and industry, where there can be a collaboration between government, industry, and energy storage centers of excellence on battery research and development and the provision of technological support. And then the third pillar is the collaboration between industry and government. Both government and industry need to invest in energy storage, R&D, and innovation programs in order to support the commercialization of energy storage products and also for the support of small, medium, and micro enterprises. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Edem. That was a really good overview of your report that you published. So I can ask Gaylor to share his screen.
Thanks a lot, Blanche. And it's a really a pleasure to be here today to share some of the findings from the work that we've been doing as STEPS in collaboration with UNIDO and the DTIC, looking at the development of the lithium-ion battery value chain in South Africa. I think Eden provided a perfect background for what I'm going to share today. As a way of introduction, a quick reminder that, of course, the market for lithium-ion battery is booming at the moment. It has already experienced material growth and is expected to rise exponentially going forward into the future, primarily driven by the demand for passenger vehicles. At the same time, we see, of course, a decline in the price that is of the battery. That bears a number of questions from a South African perspective. South Africa has an important automotive value chain. We have strong vehicle manufacturing as well as component manufacturing in the country, but we are part of a global dynamic. On the vehicle side, we only 22nd in the world. And on the component side, we are an important manufacturer, but not one of the leaders. And for now, our industry is entirely focused on the internal combustion engine. So that raises the question of the role of the automotive industry and the automotive value chain overall going forward. What is the role that South Africa could or should play in the lithium-ion battery value chain? Before looking into the South African specific dynamic, a little bit of background about the global dynamics. The first thing to understand is that we talk about lithium-ion battery, but actually there's quite a number of different components to a lithium-ion battery. Of course, as Eden raised, there's a lot of minerals that fall into a lithium-ion battery. And then at the processing stage, there are basically four main components: cathode, an anode, an electrolyte, and a separator. If you add to that, some electronics, a battery management system, an energy management system, and some packing, you've got yourself a battery pack. Then that falls into electric vehicles, energy storage, and a few other applications. At the waste management stage, we have second life, which tends to be reusing batteries that we use in electric vehicles for stationary purposes. There's even third life coming on stream in the future, but ultimately recycling through the dismantling of the batteries. There's also quite a big variety of lithium-ion batteries. There are quite a lot of different chemistries that are available on the market. There's 6 main types. They all serve different purposes. They all have advantages and disadvantages. But the important aspect is that it's a market that's evolving, and there's a lot of chemistry, lots of innovation, and they all have different capabilities and different minerals that they require. So important to understand that there's quite a lot of variety on the market, and that most of the chemistries are used for electric vehicles in some shape or form, depending on the applications. If we look at manufacturing globally, not a big surprise, China is dominating the market and is going to continue dominating the market, although forecasts expect Europe, as well a couple of other regions like India, to be picking up space a little bit going forward. But it's a very concentrated space and a very competitive space. If you look at the companies, a very similar picture, very concentrated on a few players, Panasonic, Cattle, LG, BYD. If you look at the manufacturing capacity and you particularly look at the blue bar, which is what's already been commissioned, you see very similar companies, but interestingly, some really big announcements, notably by Tesla. So again, a very concentrated space with a few manufacturers dominating the space. If you look at the cost structure, important when we're talking about local content, of course, not a big surprise here. Again, the sale is the bulk of the cost. Then the pack components add quite a sizable share. Everything else is relatively small. If we look at it from another view, sale material, about a third of the cost, the pack material, about a quarter, and the rest are your CapEx and OpEx. What about the minerals? Well, the minerals do play a big role, but as this chart depicts, the actual price sensitivity of a battery pack to the cost of minerals is relatively small. So this is for an NMC 811, which is primarily nickel. So of course, the variability is higher for a nickel mineral, but it's relatively small. You see a doubling of the nickel price could lead you to only about 6% variability. So important to understand that the price variability of a battery pack for minerals is not insignificant, but also not huge. What about intellectual property and patents? Well, here we have, again, a very interesting picture, very concentrated. Now, if we take a bird's eye view and look at climate change mitigation in the transport sector in terms of patents, so of course bigger than just electric vehicles, you see a few countries dominating that market. The US, Japan, Germany, South Korea, France, China, and the UK, basically. If we narrow down on specific aspects of the value chain, for example, propulsion of electric vehicles, very similar picture. Countries might be in a slightly different order, but it's the same countries. Right? If you look at the conversion of energy to from chemical to electrical energy, again, a very similar picture. And if we look at the apparatus for such conversions, again, that's similar countries. So overall, a very competitive picture dominated by a few countries, a few companies on the global level. So where does this leave us from a South African perspective? Well, let's go through each stage of the value chain. The first is research and development. We have in South Africa Energy Storage Consortium, which is being spearheaded by the Department of Science and Innovation, which gathers virtually every leading research and academic institution in the country that is working in the lithium-ion battery space. You can see them on the slide, and they are working on every aspect of the value chain, from precursor development to material synthesis and characterization, cell and battery fabrication and engineering, testing, all the way to battery recycling. Importantly, though, the initial intent of the consortium was to develop IP, to develop patents. But I think there was quickly a realization that we were not going to be competing with the leaders when it comes to patenting and IP. So there's been a shift effectively in the function of the consortium to focus more on skills development that are then being fed to the market. And there's actually been a really good symbiotic relationship between our research community and the small businesses that are operating in that value chain. And I'll get back to that going forward. If we look at mining, it was raised by Adam. Lots of minerals fall into a battery. This is just an illustration. Again, there are different chemistries, and different chemistries take different minerals. Lithium, of course, is the common denominator, is in all the chemistries. That's why we call them lithium-ion batteries. But by no means the primary mineral. In some cases, it's manganese. In others, it's nickel. Sometimes it's cobalt. And that's just the cathode. There are obviously other minerals falling into the anode, the electrolyte solution, the separator, and so on. From a South African perspective, it was raised. We have many of those minerals. Manganese, we are a world leader. We have about 50% of global reserves, about 80% of global deposits, and are the primary producers. We also have titanium, nickel, iron ore, phosphate rock, cobalt, and copper, and others that do fall into the EV value chain. This is really focusing on the lithium-ion battery. If we extend this to Africa, as it was raised by Eden, all the minerals are there, from bauxite to graphite to lithium in Zimbabwe to phosphate rock in North Africa, all the way to titanium. So really an opportunity when it comes to mining. The key question is, how do we move up the value chain, develop something that's beyond mining? So what about mineral beneficiation? Well, in South Africa, we have quite a long-standing experience and expertise when it comes to mineral beneficiation, although it has been somewhat under pressure in recent years. But interestingly, there's very little beneficiation of minerals to battery grade. We have manganese and aluminium that are currently refined to battery grade, and nickel and lithium potentially in the pipeline. If we look at manganese, it's one company. It's the Manganese Metal Company in Nelspruit, which is really a one-of-a-kind enterprise. It's the only supplier of electrolyte manganese metal outside of China, and the largest producer of the purest form of manganese, which is a 99.9%. Really a great enterprise and really unique in South Africa, and actually unique on a global stage. If we look at aluminium, we have Guan Company, that's Hulamin in KZN, that already supplies aluminium battery baseplate. It's also looking at developing the collector, which is known as battery foil, and looking at other applications, particularly for the frame and the body. As I mentioned, there's also a potential pipeline with Takadu looking at nickel and Lithium Lion looking at lithium from Zimbabwe, both in collaboration with Mintech. If we look at cell manufacturing, we find that thanks to our consortium, research consortium, we have the industrial capacity and we have the know-how, but there is no commercial production of battery cells, only a pilot plant at the University of the Western Cape. And it remains to be seen whether a South African-based operation could be competitive. Could we realistically compete with China and East Asia when it comes to manufacturing cells? We do have some players. The main one is Meter, which is a fairly large South African company that does produce cells and components, but only in Romania and in Turkey, not in South Africa. They have developed a manufacturing line that is modular and could be bought locally, but have so far not done so, waiting to see whether this could be economically viable. We also have some prospectors, Mega Million and AutoX, who both looking at this opportunity. Mega Million aiming to develop a pilot plant in Kucha, AutoX, which manufactures lead acid batteries, looking at whether they could move into the lithium ion battery space, but none of those have actually made any material investment. And as I said, it is not clear whether there is actually a business case at this point. But what about battery manufacturing? Not the cell itself, the actual battery. Well, here we have a very vibrant space that is operating on imported cells, largely from East Asia. We have numerous companies that have developed IP and expertise in the manufacturing of components, parts, systems, and the assembly of battery packs. In some cases, companies have even leveraged that to develop a specialized offering like niche market vehicles. We have specifically strong capabilities when it comes to the battery management system. There's quite a number of companies, and we have a representative from Balancel on the panel, which is one of those companies. We have some very nice vehicle offerings when it comes to niche markets, refrigerant truck, small three-wheeler utility vehicle, bus and minibus conversions, and so on. And we have even more companies that are just simply manufacturing batteries of some local and some imported parts and components. So a very vibrant space of companies, largely small to medium-sized businesses operating in that environment. Lastly, what about waste management? Well, waste management, as I said, is second life batteries. We have quite a lot of companies operating in that space, largely for now relying on imported batteries from China, which then they process and service domestically. On the recycling side, we don't have a recycling facility for lithium-ion batteries. This is a space that is currently dominated by China, as you can see on the bottom left, and is going to be heavily dominated by China going forward. Batteries are currently stockpiled in the country, but there are two important developments. First, a ban on e-waste from being landfilled from August 2021, and some recent regulations on the waste management of e-waste that are coming on stream that will force industry to look at those developments and actually develop a plan. It remains to be proven whether or not a recycling facility could be viable economically in South Africa, though. So what is the way forward? Where does this leave us? Well, the first implication is that we really need to pay specific attention to finding a competitive advantage. As I said, this is a very, very competitive space. It's moving rapidly. We do have some expertise, but it doesn't appear that, for example, when it comes to manufacturing, we can compete for the manufacturing of cells. There hasn't been a very strong business case put on the table to date. However, when you look at battery packs, that's a very different story. As I said, a very vibrant space. We're very strong, and we have lots of companies operating here. However, there are still high barriers to entry, particularly for the mass automotive market and the large-scale energy storage, which we need to break. If we look at beneficiation, we have a significant mineral endowment in the country and in the region. That provides a valuable comparative advantage, but it's not itself a competitive advantage. It warrants, though, that we look at it and saying, how can we beneficiate? There's a lot of debate whether or not South Africa provides the adequate conditions to develop mineral beneficiation. But the reality is that we do have some really interesting developments, as I mentioned, in manganese, in aluminium, in nickel, lithium, even in titanium. So we need to look at that seriously. In terms of policy support, we need to send the right signals. That means significant investment and support, particularly to make sure that we provide the platform for the businesses operating in that space, the small businesses operating in that space to grow. And there's a number of support areas that are really important. One is testing and certifications. Small businesses in that space have to go at great lengths to certify and at great price to certify their product for export to the EU and US market, as this is not possible in the South African context. We do have some testing capabilities and certification capabilities, but that needs to be particularly enhanced through UNIDO and the Nelson Mandela University. Another area that we could be looking at is the provision of warranty, as it's also a bit of an hindering factor for some players. Access to market, a challenge both on the domestic and global space. On the domestic market, the main challenge is that there is very little demand. And that's a bit of a catch-22 situation because a lot of companies in that space are waiting for a market to materialize before they invest and vice versa. So we may have to rely on the export market in the short term. But we need to be aware that any kind of high level of local content in the energy and automotive space going forward is going to rely on having a strong battery manufacturing space. On the global side, as I said, it's very competitive. We have some wonderful companies operating in niche markets, but if we want to crack the nut and go into the mass markets, then we need to break that deadlock going forward. What about skills and development and R&D? To date, access to skills has not really been a key constraint. As I alluded to earlier, there's been a really symbiotic relationship between research and the private sector in that respect, that many of the companies operating in that space actually come from academia. The leaders of those companies come from our universities or our research councils. So to date, it hasn't really been much of a concern. But going forward, as I indicated, we know we're near the leaders. So if we want to keep up, that may become a hindering factor in the future. So what about our main options going forward? Well, we think that the main option for the short term is really to try and boost our battery manufacturing. That will require increased focus on investing in that part of the value chain. Notably through testing and certification, as I mentioned, but also through R&D and skills development. It will have some cost implications, of course, but it could provide the anchor for comprehensive value chain development in the country by focusing on the battery manufacturing, and particularly on the component side. Mineral refining is also a very sizable opportunity. I said we do have some really good pockets of excellence. We need, though, to put our emphasis on infrastructure. If we're looking about mineral beneficiation, this is energy intensive, transport intensive. So is our infrastructure right for that? It's critical. And if we are serious about mineral refining, we need to give some thoughts to our mineral beneficiation policy. From a top-down approach, what about development pricing, for example? And from a bottom-up approach, what about development pricing? And also from a top-down approach, what about our localization requirements? What about the automotive requirements as well in the APDP? That means some investment in infrastructure, but it can really provide for South Africa to be a leader in that space. What about the two other key streams? Cell manufacturing, as I said, for now, it remains to be proven whether this is competitive in the South African context. It would require a great deal of investment on the supply side and a strong partnership with an existing manufacturer to have access to precursors, IP, equipment, and skills. So quite a big ask. And on the demand side, we need a market. The reality is that all existing markets have already been captured. So the ambition is, of course, to position ourselves as a supplier for Africa, but that's a market that is yet to appear, yet to grow. And we would be coming in competition with existing manufacturers. So what is our offering in that respect? Probably a very strong symbiotic relationship with the transport, automotive, and energy sectors could provide an anchor for that. But again, can we be competitive? The cost of setting up a cell manufacturing plant are significantly higher than just a manufacturing plant for batteries. And we have to look at those so-called mega or giga factories. This is just the way to go in that particular sector. Lastly, battery recycling. I said we do not have some capacity at this point, but we do have the expertise when it comes to mineral processing and mineral recovery. Whether or not it could be viable to have a recycling plant is unknown at this point. We have no data to actually inform such information. But what we know is that we need sufficient volume, we need favorable price, and we need low transport cost. A pilot facility, according to industry, is 12 to 24 months away at best, and they are looking at this at the moment. So in conclusion, we see that the e-mobility and energy storage space is growing rapidly, and it's really driving this demand for lithium-ion batteries. Of course, there are other chemistries as well and other potential batteries, but when it comes to EVs, lithium-ion batteries are the dominant technology. South Africa has actually a very vibrant value chain already. Not all stages are at the same level of development, and not all stages are necessarily competitive. But what is sure is that beyond mining, which is the obvious opportunity, developing battery manufacturing as well as mineral refining are ready for scale-up. Cell manufacturing and recycling could and should be explored, but it is unclear whether they are economically viable and economically sustainable at this point. Provided that we put the emphasis on our strengths rather than unsubstantiated aspirations, I think we have a really great opportunity going forward. I thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the proceedings and the discussion.
Good, thank you so much, Gaylor. Those are really strong recommendations. So hopefully the study will reveal more and being uptake by policymakers. So I hand over to Paul, who will give us a perspective from the industry side. He's from Balancel. I think your company was mentioned in one of Gaylor's slides, the BMS. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what the industry thinks of this value chain.
Everyone, I've been asked just to give a brief overview on the barriers and opportunities of battery manufacturing in South Africa, specifically from the industry perspective. The best way to start would be to give you a brief overview and background on Balancel. We are a innovation and tech business. We focus on lithium ferrophosphate batteries and battery management systems, all resulting in a smart connected battery. We are changing the way that stored energy is supplied through batteries that manage and protect themselves, and then also report their condition remotely. So our business is very focused on the differentiation and benefits we give around the battery management system, using cells that are imported, and then adding value closer and higher up the value chain to the customer. Some of the other background has to do with funding. It is both kind of a benefit and been a challenge throughout the years. And if you look at the slide, you know, I think Gaylor also mentioned a lot of the universities. Ian de Vries, the founder, was a professor of electrical engineering. A lot of our core team came from Optimal Energy. So Balancel wouldn't have survived or got to where it was without the Department of Science and Technology. We got funding through the Technology Innovation Agency and some grants through the DTI. That being said, without the support of our private angel investor, some of the delays, lack of support, and kind of red tape in accessing the funds could have quite easily have sunk our business a couple of times. So I think the message is that there needs to be even further incentives for private individuals and partnerships with business to help support the efforts of government-based funding. I think all of us should, or most people are aware of some of the news, and if you just look at the last few months of 2020, it really does prove that this battery space is a fast-moving global industry. And I see that as a slight threat because we really are small fish in a very large ocean. And with such a fast-moving global industry with big players, if we don't continue to be innovative and find our way through this space, we're going to be left behind quite quickly. That being said, it's not all doom and gloom. I've got a slide here just having a look at the supply chain in an EV market. It is a global kind of slide. And what I take away from this is, and Gaylor also touched on it, a lot of South Africans' innovation and investment and success has been around the application of the batteries, not just the supply chain up there. And if you look at the investment and funding that is coming internationally, you know, there's more than half of it is going into the actual application of those batteries, and more than the rest of those combined 4 or 5 other markets in that supply chain. We've also touched on the dominant current and expected cell manufacturers, all coming out of China and Asia. They've got a massive head start, and with investments and government subsidies, we are seeing the price of cells come down to levels where they are almost commodities. We believe that instead of competing at a cell manufacturing level, we aim to take advantage of all these subsidies and add the beneficiation value add closer to the customer side, focusing on the battery management systems, other features and benefits that might do them, possibly even look into things like the recycling as well. You know, that's where the volumes are going to grow, and we can still you still have 24 months, if not longer, to invest and do the R&D to be a global competitor in that space. Speaking of competing, if you look at all the battery manufacturers, they have all gone into joint ventures with vehicle manufacturers. And I feel that South Africa can definitely learn from that. And we know that the market here is limited and small at this stage. If we want to access market, I believe we've got to try and leverage off our local distributors to get into the OEM space, to find ways of incentivizing further joint ventures with private and public companies, and look at launching our skills and products into the global markets. It's a main focus and strategy of ours, and we believe that there is a real opportunity. The one thing about exporting, and I think it was also touched on earlier, is testing and certification. At this stage, you know, the actual battery manufacturing space, there are certain UL and CE tests that we know about, but we need to put more investment and further understand exactly what testing and certification is required for us to export and access these markets. I believe we've got the products and the skills to actually be leaders and set very high standards of testing. We just need the support and further testing infrastructure within the country to do that. So just to sum up, you know, I think our business believes that the opportunity is in the beneficiation further up the supply chain and the value chain towards the customer, in the application of the cells, the battery management systems. We continually focus on customer benefits and value adds that we can offer. And there are areas like recycling and other indirect businesses that will promote a lot of employment and create growth in the economy. So it's an exciting space to be in. And yeah, we're very proud of what we've done, and we welcome any questions or yeah, any discussions further. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so I think when you mentioned testing and accreditation, this also came up very strongly during interviews, but so Gelo mentioned it on his report. So yeah, those are really good points to raise. Also in terms of, you know, funding, it seems like you have benefited from government, but of course we can't only look at government funding, there needs to be private sector funding as well. So yeah, very interesting insights. I'm gonna hand over to Gerard on his thoughts, insights, response to, you know, we've heard today, but I think the 3 presentations have been excellent. It's been good, some linkages between all 3. So it's really great. Thank you. Gerard, maybe give us your response.
Thank you very much for the previous presentations. I think the presenters did an excellent job to explain the industry very well and what we have to do going forward. Now, from a DTIC point of view, we're basically more responsible for the policy side. Now, both Gaylor and Paul mentioned the importance of supply side policy, but also demand side policy. So what we find in this green space is usually a lot of focus on the supply side, but if we don't have a vibrant market that's growing, you cannot really expect a lot of investment. So a big focus, I think, going forward for us would be to figure out how to grow this market, to use subsidies, taxes, etc., to really create that demand that's required to increase the number of electric vehicles in the market, and then also the batteries and the componentry and the R&D and the industry that will support that. But just a little bit of background, what we've done so far is we started quite a few years ago and we did a mapping of the policy and regulatory framework in the country. We, for example, looked at all the subsidies, taxes, regulations, etc. And we've got a very good idea of how we have to change this to promote green transport in South Africa. Now, just to give you one example, why is this important? If you look at the fuel levy, and we saw the Minister of Finance just a day or two ago, I think, increase the fuel levy again. It's quite high in South Africa, but electric vehicles that use a road don't pay any levies like fuel levies. Gas-powered vehicles also don't pay any levies. Now, what we find from an investor's point of view is they need transparency on the medium and long-term view of government on what will be taxed and what will be subsidized, which is very important really in this space. The next area that we found was quite controversial in South Africa is a lot of our energy comes from coal-fired electricity, and it wasn't really very clear if you use coal-fired electricity whether your carbon footprint will go down if you use electric vehicles. So we did quite a comprehensive study on how the rollout and the growth of an electric vehicle market will impact the liquid fuel industry, first of all, how demand will decline, and how to deal with that. But we also looked at how it will impact the demand for electricity. What will the electricity peak look like in future? And do we actually have enough electricity? And more importantly is what's the impact on our CO2? And this research is all available, but just an interesting fact is even if we use coal-fired electricity for electric vehicles, the carbon footprint, I think, is still about 33% lower than to use petrol or diesel. The next area I think that was important is to, with the assistance of TIPS, we did a lot of work with NAMSA to understand how we can grow the market for electric vehicles. I mean, there's a big controversy in the country. Electric vehicles have got a 25% import duty, for example, on it, while small petrol and diesel vehicles can be imported free of duty. So we did quite a comprehensive work with TIPS to understand what can be done to really start to accelerate the market, to accelerate the demand for electric vehicles going forward. And that work was finalized not too long ago, and a serious discussion will now take place with the automotive manufacturers and government to see how we can grow the market for electric vehicles. And then the very important one that Gaylor presented was the automotive manufacturing industry in South Africa is, of course, the crown prince of industries. It's a very high-tech industry. We export a large number of vehicles every year, so it's a very important industry for South Africa. Unfortunately, a lot of the components we manufacture are focused on petrol and diesel. We do catalytic converters, radiators, exhaust systems, and these kind of things. And these things are, of course, not used in electric vehicles. So a lot of effort must go into the identification of future components that can be manufactured in South Africa. But I think as a high level, government's view is that this industry has a huge potential. There's a lot of future opportunities for economic growth, a lot of future opportunities for new businesses. And the message we get is that at the highest level, there is a strong willingness to grow this industry quite rapidly. And what we're basically doing at the moment is the Department of Transport has got a high-level green transport strategy in place, but we're working very closely with the Department of Transport to basically develop implementation plans. And this is quite advanced, and I think within the next few months, recommendations will be made how to now start implementing what we understand must be done, and accelerate this market for green transport and electric vehicles. So from our side, we're really looking forward to this. This is an exciting space, and we think in this depressed economic situation we find ourselves in the country, this industry is really got a lot of opportunity for South Africa. So I think I'll end there, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Gerard. I think you mentioned quite a number of reports there. So there's the NAMSA report from TIPS. I think all of these are available. And also the reason why we having this session is the launch of the study by TIPS. So all of this will be available. We'll provide information later, but if you want to read up more on it, it is available. So we don't have much time. If there's any clarification questions from the panelists, maybe they can ask those questions. Yeah, so I think it's been a very good session. We started out with Ms. Foley here, who talked about the SADC perspective. I think in your presentation, you did mention something about the SADC industrial roadmap. So of course, it's very important to talk at the SADC region as well, because we're looking at regional integration of industrial policies. Then we had Gelo, who had recommendations and desk studies of two-part technical pathways of battery manufacturing, as well as mineral refining in the immediate term. And then Paul giving us a perspective from the industry side, and then Gerard with his response on the policy. Is there any sort of last comments from the panelists? Maybe there's something that raised some questions during the presentation, or maybe I can just give an opportunity to each other.
Maybe just if I can say a word, Blanche. I mean, I think what we all agree on is that this is a very vibrant space, and I think we need to get into it. There's been very little focus to date on this, and most of the companies in that space have operated on their own. There's few exceptions that have been well supported, like Bell and Cell, but most have operated largely on their own. And if we want to have a really strong role going forward, we should act now. If we react in 5 or 10 years, it's going to be too late. It's really about now. The opportunity is now. So that's when we need to act, and hopefully all the work that's being done can catalyze action.
Thank you, Gelo. Yeah, it speaks to your study as well about the immediate term and the short term and the long term. So we need to strategically position ourselves, which part of the chain we need to take an opportunity on, because as I think, Paul, you were saying, we don't want to be left behind. So yeah, I think hopefully policymakers and those who are watching this are able to see that there are opportunities for the country, but hopefully, you know, we act on it quite soon. If there's nothing else, I'll draw this to a close. But thank you so much to the panelists. You know, the Africa Energy Indaba is 3 days, so there are a lot more other sessions to attend. So hopefully you'll do that. But thank you.